So we did add some styling and a basic layout. This is nice, but of course not all we want to do. In most apps, no matter if we're talking about web apps or native mobile apps, we also want to allow the user to interact with the app. And we got a text input here, and we also got a button that could be pressed. But at the moment, of course, nothing happens if you type here or if you press this button. This is ignored. And this is ignored because we're not handling these events. And just as with a web app that you're building with React, you of course need to handle them if you want something to happen. The good news is that you do handle events in the same way you would do it in web apps though. You can add event listeners and connect them to event handler functions, and you can manage state in your components with the use state hook just as you would do it in any other React app. Because this is just a React app, the only difference, as you learned in the first course section, compared to a React app that targets the web, is that we use a different platform with React Native instead of React DOM. But when it comes to React's core features, like handling events or managing state, that all works in exactly the same way as you know it from React for the web. And here I got two events that I want to handle. The first one would be a click on this button, but before we handle that, I also want to handle keystrokes on that text input element so that I can grab the value the user entered and so that we can then use this value to finally add a new goal in this list of goals as a next step. And therefore, these are the first two things I want to do. I will add a function that could be called goal input handler that is responsible for fetching that user input as the user types. Then I'll add another function, add goal handler, which should be fired when this button here is clicked. Now to connect those functions, we use special event listening props that are provided by React Native on its components. For example, to connect goal input handler to text input, we can add the special onChange text prop. This is a prop exposed by React Native, which wants a function as a value, a pointer at a function. In my case, I'll point at this goal input handler function, so I'll pass that as a value here. And I'll press the auto format shortcut to make this a bit easier to read. Now please note that I don't execute this function here. I don't add parentheses. If you would add parentheses, this function would be executed as soon as this code is parsed and evaluated. And this would be too soon because that would be the case when this user interface is rendered. I don't want to do that. Instead, I want to point at this function so that React can execute it for me whenever this text changes in this input. And that's what will happen if we set it up like this. Now in this goal input handler function here, we then receive the entered value automatically. Because keep in mind, it will be React that calls this function because it's React Native that exposes this prop. And therefore React, or to be precise React Native, will also provide us a value as an input, as a parameter to this function, and that will be the entered text. So we get the entered text automatically. And then we could, for example, console log this here, like this. If we save this code and we have the npm start process up and running, we can go back here and, for example, enter test. And as I type this here, you see the log update here in my terminal with every keystroke until we have the word test. So that's how this works, and this works totally on its own. So that's how we can get the entered value. Of course, we don't want to get the value because we need it in this function though. Instead, we need it in this function, so we need it when the button is clicked. And for this, we need to connect this function to a button click as a first step. Now, if you would be building a web app and you had a HTML button here, you would add the onClick prop. But with React Native, this prop doesn't exist on a button. But we have a similar prop. It's called onPress. It's called onPress instead of onClick because technically we don't have clicks in native mobile apps. Instead, we have taps or presses. So here we have onPress, and just as with onChangeText, here I point at my function that should be executed. In this case, addGoalHandler. So now this function will be triggered whenever the button is clicked or tapped. Now we want the value entered in this text input in this function. So what we need to do is we need to store it as state. We need to store it as state, which is updated with every keystroke in this function, so that we can then use it in this second function. And state management works just as it works in any other React app. We can import the useState hook from React, so not from React Native, but from React, the core React library itself. And then we can register a new state here in our app component function, just as we do it in any other React app. So here I'll call useState and set this to an empty string initially, because this will be my user input state or my entered goal text state, which can be updated with the setEnteredGoalText function. And in case this syntax doesn't tell you anything, definitely have a look at some dedicated React resources like my React Complete Guide course, because this is standard React and you should know syntax like this. So now we got this entered goal text state, which initially is an empty string, but with every keystroke in my text input, I will update it and set my entered goal text to the entered text I'm receiving here as a parameter. And therefore now in addGoalHandler, we can access this state and do something with it. And for the moment, I will simply console log my entered goal text state here, but of course soon we will update a list of goals which we then output down there. So let's save this. And now here, if I enter test and click add goal, we got this test log here. Or if we enter some other text to see that this is really coming from our updated code, now we see some other text here. So this is working as intended. The next step now is to make sure that we can manage a list of goals, which we then can also output.